If this nice young man told you that his neighbors are stalking and threatening him, would you believe him? Meet Jung-woo, the main character in the 2019 Korean psychological thriller Strangers from Hell, also known as Hell is Other People. The protagonist moves to Seoul and ends up renting a cheap room in a building full of stalkers and murderers where he gradually loses his mind as he is forced to defend himself. Or is he? If you haven't seen it yet, I would highly recommend watching it because it is one of the best TV shows of all time. Strangers from Hell is a beautifully shot 10-episode masterpiece with phenomenal actors, which has a similar vibe to the Japanese anime Aku no Hana. One of the reasons Strangers from Hell is such an entertaining watch is the fact that Jung-woo is an unreliable narrator. Usually, we as the audience assume that the protagonist is honestly telling us the story the way it happened, but an unreliable narrator throws this notion out of the window. Jung-woo deliberately misleads the audience, constantly contradicts himself, and changes the events to make himself look sympathetic and relatable. He also leaves out important details, confuses the timeline, and often tells two different versions of events. For example, in the first episode, he throws the dart that lands on the first place, which should have earned him a laptop, but immediately after that he says he won the 5th place 5 times. So, which of the two happened? Rewatching this K-drama reveals more and more intentional inconsistencies with every watch. In this video essay, I want to explore the different ways in which Jung-woo is lying to the viewers, why he might be doing it, what it means, and try to understand what the hell really happened. The first thing that is said in the narrator's voice in the TV show is, "I started this novel when I lived in the studio." This means that the whole plot of Strangers from Hell is a novel that the protagonist is writing, and none of it is actually happening. Jung-woo really is a guy who lives in Seoul in a rundown studio, but none of the creepy stalking and killing is real. He just has an overactive imagination and uses people around him as basis for characters in the story he's writing. Take a look at this scene, in which Jung-woo sits down to start his novel, while we see the suspicious neighbor as we hear the narration. There is another instance of him writing, which cuts to a scene with a cop conveniently running into the twins doing shady stuff. Or this scene of him sitting down to write about neighbors getting rid of the body in the mountains and describing exactly what they are doing. After that scene, the camera lingers on a close-up of the ankle monitor, to let the audience know that the cops know his every move. He is probably not burying bodies in the woods. The narration and the camera keep hinting that none of this is happening. Reality and the protagonist's imagination are shown simultaneously and are visually represented by the editing style. This TV show uses an insane amount of really cool match cuts. That's when two shots with a similar composition are used as a transition to the next scene. It can be anything like similar colors, themes, objects, or movement. I think that every match cut represents the line between reality and the novel. Jung-woo is at work using things that are happening around him to imagine the plot of his book. Whenever he is bored, he somehow immediately finds a crucial piece of evidence or witnesses something suspicious while walking home from work. Time is also not always linear. When the real villain is revealed, the sequence is told with confusing time passage. In the time it took the protagonist to get from the entrance of the building to his room, the antagonist somehow manages to witness a murder, hold his villain speech, kill the murderer, clean up the mess, and walk right behind the protagonist in the hallway. Maybe this is the author coming up with a story as he walks to his room. If this is a book that Jung-woo is writing, it would also explain why we see two different versions of the same events throughout the series. Like when one of the neighbors gets attacked in his room. Or maybe he hears a weird noise and gets attacked when he goes to investigate where it's coming from? Or which one is it? I think this is the author actively rewriting the story as he goes and changing a scene because it would fit the plot better. There are also two versions of a conversation on the roof. In the first one, Moon-jo says, "You might be the same type of person as me," and the protagonist looks all creeped out as the episode ends on a cliffhanger. But the same conversation goes differently in the following episode. Instead of a creepy line, he gives Jung-woo a beer and they talk about books. Is this the author changing the story again? I also keep wondering if all of the characters are real people or if some of them were made up by Jung-woo. The editing makes me think that the policewoman and Moon-jo are both not real. The whole plot is a mix of real things that are happening to the main character and him making up exaggerated stories based on his neighbors. Unless... what if this is not the plot of his book? What if he's lying for a more sinister reason? The story begins with a flash forward to the last episode that paints the protagonist as an innocent victim who gets attacked, which influences our perception of him throughout the following 10 episodes. The scene is shown differently compared to what actually happens in the last episode, when he enters the building with a full intent to murder. Which also turns out to not be the full story. The last big plot twist reveals that it was the protagonist who murdered everyone in the building, and not the villain. Jung-woo keeps changing the story to make himself look like the good guy who was provoked. But what if he was the only murderer all along and not just in the last episode? From Jung-woo's point of view, everyone around him is trying to kill him and he is in danger. His justification for violence is that someone is breaking into his room, but we actually never see any evidence. The creepy neighbor is weird, but we never see him do anything to the main character besides staring. In every altercation these two have, Jung-woo is always the one starting fights and attacking, not the other way around. He accuses the neighbor of breaking in, but he's the one who keeps standing in front of his door, aggressively searching his room, and even forcing his neighbor to pull down his pants at knife point. To establish what is really happening, Strangers from Hell uses CCTV footage, but it doesn't prove any of his suspicions, all it shows is him being aggressive. He says that he's stalked, but it is always shown in an implausible way. We do very clearly see him watching his neighbors and his girlfriend. Who's the real stalker here? I also wonder about the cat scenes. Both the twins and Jung-woo are shown approaching cats with excitement, and the story establishes that someone keeps killing the cats in the neighborhood. The way the protagonist tells the story, the audience automatically assumes that it's the twins who are murdering them. But when the cop asks about it, one of the twins keeps insisting that he's not the one who did it. It is mentioned that the cats were killed with poison mixed with food, and it is Jung-woo who keeps feeding them. He tells the cops that he's afraid of his neighbors. Together they rush to save his girlfriend, to let the cops and the audience know that he would never want anything bad happen to her. He also calls the cops on the day of the murders to let them know he thinks his neighbors are killing people. Isn't that convenient? He now established a trail of clues for the cops to consider it self-defense when he eventually kills someone. Also, pay attention to the scene in which the second twin is killed. Two men walk into a room, each with a knife, one of them ends up dead and we don't see the fight. After that, Jung-woo calmly steps out to take a call and the dentist walks in looking upset. When I first watched it, I assumed that Moon-jo killed him, but now I'm sure it was the protagonist. Later on, the remaining twin confirms that it was Jung-woo who killed his brother. Right after the alleged murder, Jung-woo has a dream of finding himself in a bloody room. He says himself that everyone who lives there should die several times throughout the series. I don't think he was forced to kill anyone for self-defense. I think it was all carefully planned in advance. If we look at the scenes of Jung-woo fighting with his girlfriend without cutting away to what other characters are doing, then his actions look really sinister. After the fight, he looks really angry, then goes into a convenience store to buy a knife, and looks like he's going to use it. He also practices stabbing at home when nobody's watching. Later, the protagonist attacks his girlfriend, who immediately breaks up with him. His boss ends up dead the same night. A couple of days earlier, we saw Jung-woo playing with that penguin at work, which is the weapon that his boss gets killed with. Then, we see Jung-woo standing in front of his girlfriend's house right when she gets attacked and kidnapped. he also lures his friend into the building who ends up dead. All of this seems premeditated. Jung-woo tells the story in a way that clearly sets up Moon-jo as the culprit and himself as a noble hero who rushes to save his woman, and not as a vengeful ex who can't handle rejection. At the funeral, we see Jung-woo in front of the mirror trying to convince himself that he's not the one who did it. Or maybe he's not lying. What if he doesn't understand what's happening? Jung-woo is extremely paranoid, but everyone around him thinks that he's too sensitive. None of the other characters think that his neighbors are suspicious. The protagonist overreacts to mildly inconvenient comments with extremely violent fantasies and eagerly gets into bar fights that have nothing to do with him. He is very jumpy, expects danger at every turn, and perceives people merely looking at him as an attack. Jung-woo thinks that the creepy neighbor walks around with a knife, but the camera often shows that it is just a screwdriver that he scratches his leg with. Jung-woo thinks he's being followed and that somebody is entering his room when he's at work, but doesn't have any proof. There are several scenes in which the neighbors ominously stand in front of his door with weapons, but anytime he goes out to check, the hallway is empty. Jung-woo hears sounds that nobody else can hear. When he and Moon-jo are walking past the 4th floor, he hears a suspicious sound, but his neighbor says that he didn't hear anything. The protagonist also hears voices and sees people that are not there, which makes him a danger to everyone around him. Jung-woo freaks out about harmless things that seem scary to him. We see flashback to his time in the army, which often turn out to be a dream, and the details and characters change every time. The lines between the memories and dreams are very blurry. Which parts of the flashbacks really happened? And were all scenes that we saw real? Jung-woo is also not sober for a big chunk of the story. He's often either blackout drunk, drugged, or both, and can't remember what happened. On the day he arrives at the studio, Ajuma hands him 2 drinks, which are presumably already drugged because when Jung-woo is in his room, the camera movement changes. Every time he is tripping, the camera indicates it with an arc shot. He gets drugged again on 2 more days and sees some scary trippy visions. There are also 2 instances of that shot without him drinking anything suspicious beforehand. Notably, the big fight scene in the last episode was also filmed like this, indicating that it didn't happen the way he thinks it did. It was later revealed that Moon-jo was not there, and he was talking to himself. It is unclear whether the dentist actually exists or if we have a Tyler Durden situation on our hands, and if he was just in the protagonist's head all along. But if that is true, then several other characters might not be real either. Does Jung-woo have dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, psychosis, or something along these lines? That would explain why his story doesn't make any sense. What do you think really happened? Is this just a novel that he is writing? Is he a murderer who lies to the audience? Is he mentally unstable? Or maybe all 3 at the same time? Leave a comment below with your theories and interpretations. I want to hear your hot take. As a final note, I would like to recommend some media that has a similarly dark atmosphere. The manga Blood on the Tracks by the same author who also wrote Aku no Hana, the novel Earthlings by my favorite Japanese writer Sayaka Murata, the movie Unlocked, where Siwan also plays the main role, and the Netflix drama GP, which explores the flaws in the Korean military system. Or perhaps a different video from this channel?